The Flavor in Your Ear remix is the best remix ever.
In music, it's a special occasion when the remix is better than the original. Oftentimes, it is hard to replicate whatever magic made the original special. Dragon Ball Z is, in my opinion, not the best, but the greatest and most impactful anime of all time. So is it even realistic to believe that the remix could be better than the original? Well, I think so. I think a pretty compelling argument can be made, and that's what I'll try to do in this video. Dragon Ball Z Kai first aired in 2009, and for me as a kid watching it on Nicktoons, it was a dream come true. I personally believe that it was produced to attract a younger audience and that it would be part of the plan to revive the series. Now, the production team has said that Kai was made to be more faithful to the manga, but to me that's a load of BS. It was simply made to attract a larger audience, and that was okay for me. I finally got to see one of my favorite shows on a week-to-week basis in its entirety. But now that I'm older and have had the chance to watch the original Dragon Ball Z multiple times, I do think there are clear differences that place one above the other. And I think that the most noticeable difference between the two is the visuals. Now, one of the things most fans point out when speaking of the negatives of Dragon Ball Z Kai is the censorship. And yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of the way they altered blood on characters, but you gotta understand, in America, Kai was on Nicktoons, a channel geared towards children anywhere between ages 6 and 12, so the censorship of blood makes sense. But that's only the Nicktoons version, at least to my knowledge. You can still watch Dragon Ball Z Kai in its entirety without the censorship of blood. There is still censorship of naked characters and middle fingers, but that doesn't add or take away from my enjoyment of the series. And the second part of the visuals that I like to highlight is the color palette, which I definitely prefer Kai's. The colors are slightly darker and less washed out in comparison to the original, which I like, but in the moments where Kai would redraw or reanimate a scene, it looked terrible. Those scenes looked like they almost didn't belong to the same production company. But like I said earlier, for the most part, I lean more towards Kai's visuals than Z, because although there are times where the redraws are awful, it is not something that happens very frequently. Now, that was the visual aspect of Dragon Ball Z Kai, but I think they did better in the audio department as well. But the music is always a controversial topic. Kenji Yamamoto is a Japanese composer who was responsible for over 15 Dragon Ball video game soundtracks going back as far as 1993 with Dragon Ball Z Super Butoden, and arranging music for the anime since 1987. And in doing music for Dragon Ball for over 2 decades, when it was time to work on Dragon Ball Z Kai, he was an easy choice to compose the soundtrack. When you watch Dragon Ball Z Kai and you've seen the original, it's very clear that Yamamoto chose to go in a very different direction than Shinsuke Kikuchi, who composed Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z soundtracks, but Yamamoto's soundtrack still suited the series, but there was one problem. In 2011, Yamamoto was fired by Toei for plagiarism in his work. And it wasn't just a little either. Much of his work in Kai was plagiarized, along with his video game soundtracks, which most fans consider to be legendary. So excluding the Tenkaichi series, any HD remake of a Dragon Ball game would have to have a new soundtrack, which sucks. And although I don't condone plagiarism, especially when it comes to art, his soundtrack was pretty good. And it is my favorite soundtrack for Dragon Ball Z. Now, I know some of you may be thinking, what about Bruce Falconer? I may have an unpopular opinion, but I'm not the biggest fan of his score for Dragon Ball Z. There are maybe 5 to 7 of his tracks that I love, but everything else I'm indifferent towards, or I just feel like it's a little obnoxious. I never get that feeling with Kai. Tracks always seem perfectly placed up until the Buu saga. I think I should also mention that Dragon Soul is the best opening for any iteration of Dragon Ball Z, and one of the best for any anime I've ever seen. Another big difference between the two is the dialogue, and that stands out from the moment Dragon Ball Z Kai starts. Now, every single line in the show doesn't hold the most weight, but in most situations, the dialogue in Kai makes more sense and is much more faithful to the source material, which is the manga. The biggest example is Goku's I am speech against Frieza. In Z, Goku claims to be the hope of the universe, like he's a hero, which if you know his character, that's not something he would say. And then in Kai, Goku says, I am the warrior of legend with a pure heart awakened by fury, which is not only more faithful to the source material, but has quite a different meaning than what was said in Dragon Ball Z. The voice acting is also a lot better in Kai because there were a number of characters voiced by the same people that worked on Dragon Ball Z, but in 2009 they'd had more experience and overall led to a better dialogue. And the last big difference between Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Z Kai is the pacing. Pacing can be one of the biggest issues for a story, and unfortunately, anime adaptations of popular manga series have had that problem in the past. Most anime before, let's say 2007, were long, and at that point in time, being an anime fan in the West was not a very popular thing to be. and part of that is because of how anime was paced. I think there are many anime that are more enjoyable than many of the cartoons I grew up with, but it's hard to get people to watch a show that's 200 episodes long. I personally don't have a problem with it, but I definitely see how it can be an extremely high barrier for entry. And so recently, many popular anime series are released in 12 episode seasons because it's more digestible for a larger audience. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but it works. And Dragon Ball Z Kai was one of the first really big anime series to take pacing to a whole new level. Now I do have to mention that Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Z Kai final chapters are two different things, and I'll get to that in a second. Dragon Ball Z through Cell's Defeat is 194 episodes. That's longer than Hunter x Hunter, Yu Yu Hakusho, My Hero Academia, Inuyasha, 6 parts of JoJo. I think you get the point. Dragon Ball Z Kai through Cell's Defeat is literally half of that with 98 episodes. Kai cut out all the filler and removed or shortened unnecessarily long scenes where characters were charging or screaming. Dragon Ball Z is iconic for those types of scenes, but I do think it was a good idea to reduce the time they took up. Now, Final Chapters is the boost saga for Dragon Ball Z Kai, and I don't like it nearly as much as the original Kai. The color palette is still different from the original Z, but I don't like it nearly as much as the first run of Kai. The score in Final Chapters was composed by Norihito Sumitomo, who's a brilliant saxophonist, but I'm not a fan of his score. And the one aspect that made the original run of Kai so different was the pacing. Yes, Final Chapters was shorter than the original Boost saga, but there are still moments where the series seems very slow, and I never thought that Kai had those moments. I guess the one positive about Final Chapters is that those really bad redraws aren't frequent. I'll always believe that Final Chapters was made just to give Kai the official ending that Z had, because I did feel a way that Kai just stopped after Cell. But crazy enough, by the time the Cell saga ended in Dragon Ball Z Kai, I was old enough to find the Boost saga on the internet, so when Final Chapters came out, I didn't bother watching it. But I guess that's how you know Kai did his job in bringing a younger audience into the fan base. So when it was time to release new movies and a new anime series, there would be more than just a nostalgic fan who would complain about how it isn't as good as the old days. And even though it is not as good as Dragon Ball Z, there are little kids out there who believe that Dragon Ball Super is the best Dragon Ball series out there. Seeing Goku achieve Ultra Instinct is their version of Goku becoming a Super Saiyan. And I think that transition is something Kai is responsible for. So when it comes to choosing which is better between Kai and Z, I think it all comes down to what you were exposed to initially. I only saw clips of Z up until 2009, never full episodes, and that was enough to make me fall in love with the series. But Kai was my first chance to watch 10 episodes of Dragon Ball Z consecutively. I also listened to Kenji Yamamoto's plagiarism all throughout my childhood in video games, so his soundtrack in Kai was more to my taste as well. And I prefer watching less episodes, even though I don't have an issue with 300 episodes of Dragon Ball Z either. I mean, I've watched all of One Piece, that's enough proof that I can get through just about anything. But that's not saying I wouldn't prefer if One Piece was shorter. So I do prefer Dragon Ball Z Kai over Dragon Ball Z. But I'm sure that if you grew up with Dragon Ball Z, hearing Kikuchi's or Falconer's music, you probably prefer the original over Kai. But hey, this is my channel, and that's my thoughts on it. But I do want to hear your thoughts as well. Which version of Dragon Ball Z do you think is better? And let me know why down in the comments. But with that being said, if you enjoyed this video or any of the other videos you've seen on my channel, please leave a like and subscribe. We're on the road to 5,000 subscribers and everyone counts. Again, this is BigTune and thanks for watching. Y'all have a good one.